Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fundamentals and Practical Leadership, Session 6, Human Resource Essentials. What I wish I knew about HR when I first became a leader or manager. I love this quote. I am convinced that nothing we do is more important than hiring and developing people. At the end of the day, you bet on people, not on strategies. This session highlights key HR essentials every new manager should know, from how and when to document conversations to the importance of consistent policy application and how to navigate the tension between organizational transparency and HR confidentiality. You'll also hear candid lessons from experienced leaders about the early mistakes they made and how you can avoid them. Let's begin. So we want to talk a little bit about context. Why do managers or leaders that are not in HR, do managers and leaders that are not in HR need to know about HR? This is really essential for people to understand what their role is. And that role has to do with legislation and how the courts view the employer-employee relationship. And it really is kind of a yin-yang when you think about HR. There are elements that are about support and really supporting individuals, as we've talked all the way through in our seminars. And then there are also pieces that have to do with that aspect of ensuring that you're following policy, that you're applying it carefully, that you're applying it consistently, and that you're following what you need to follow in order to ensure that everything is taken care of. So we'll do a short trip through the hire and probation period, progressive discipline, performance management, and accommodations. This, of course, is nowhere near all of what HR is, but these are the topics and areas that we've heard from participants in the past and from executive directors that they think will be important to cover. So we look at this from the perspective of what are the practical tips, and also when to consult HR when you know that you might need a bit of backup in terms of your role. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks very much, Maria, and welcome everyone. Maria and Kathleen, if you're having any issues with the audio, let me know and I'll turn my camera back off. So we want to start a bit more broadly talking about HR and management and recognizing that they are distinct functions. You will find in most organizations that are large enough, there's HR staff or possibly an HR department, as well as management staff in all of the areas of the organization. The reality is that much of what management staff deals with quite often is very much involved with HR, and there needs to be a very strong relationship and understanding there. We're going to move to the next slide. We can talk about a couple of different ways that we think about HR policies and procedures. Are you able to move to the next slide for me? Thank you, Maria. So the first way I'd like us to think about HR policies and procedures is as supportive practices for all of the staff in the organization. So we've talked about this a little bit, I think, but again, framing it from the HR perspective, if staff do not know their expectations, they cannot adhere to them and succeed in their role. So by providing policies, written procedures, we support our staff to be successful by being very clear about what we expect of them and what they can expect of us. And again, if they're not aware they've done something incorrect, they can't correct it. So we've talked a bit about feedback before, and here we'll move a little bit farther where you sometimes need to get on beyond feedback into discipline spaces. If you don't address both positives and constructive criticisms, again, they can't build on their strengths, they can't develop plans to enhance their areas of challenge. So really, we're not being supportive of them and their success if we're not doing these things. And the idea that, there's many things that you would think for yourself, it's common sense that somebody would do this or not do that. Do we really have to sort of have a policy or a procedure in place? And I think, again, we've also talked about this a little bit before. Everybody's idea of common sense may be different. So they may think they're very well using common sense, but it's different to how the organization describes it. So all of these things are the ways that you can think about HR policies and procedures as ways of supporting staff to be successful. On the flip side of the coin, if we can move to the next slide, HR policies and procedures are also risk management practice for the organization. So again, at the intersection there, you can think about risk management. How do you need to focus in order to support making sure that the organization isn't at risk, patients aren't at risk, clients aren't at risk, and the individual staff member isn't at risk. So if you look at this spectrum on the left-hand side, you have in the purple, the majority of people who will read the policy, understand it, meet expectations, maybe even have a similar sense of common sense as you do. As you move into the middle, again, this is where you start to see risk increasing. So direct management is necessary in order for understanding and compliance. They just aren't complying all of the time. And then you get higher risk with a much smaller group that really isn't complying, really isn't paying attention to the things that the organization requires of them. So you do, we've heard a bit or talked a bit about the 80-20 rule. Probably 80% or more of people are in the middle to the left, and then you have this very smaller group on the right. So repeated, because it's important also at the risk management perspective, that common sense is just not the same for everyone. So again, that can be risky if you're asking people to rely on their common sense, because you may not get the outcome that you're looking for. I do think policy is very, very important in an organization, but I also encourage fighting the urge to policy everything. So, what is the risk of an issue? What is the potential variation in how people might handle it? And that's something that requires a policy. There may be other things that that the culture of your organization, it does not require a formal policy. Maybe it requires a bit of learning and development. But every organization has a culture and an approach to policy. So you will find organizations that simply have more policy. Sometimes they are large organizations, sometimes they are a bit more complex as far as the types of things that could happen. But it's something important to know in your organization. What is that approach to formal policy and human resources? And really that is the caveat to the whole webinar. Your organization policies and practices take precedence over anything that I've said today, except some of the legal stuff. So if your policies and practices in your organization differ from some of what we're talking about, it's really your opportunity to take that information and understand the background and rationale in your organization, why it might be different to how we've discussed things today. One of the questions often management has is, what does HR do, or frontline staff even more so? They're sort of sitting in an office somewhere. We're on the front lines doing our thing. What are they up to, and why are they so important? So I have here a number of areas where HR works, and you can probably see a number of areas where that overlaps with the work that you do. So they do labor and employee relations, whether you have a union or whether you don't have a union. They can support succession and career planning. They support talent management for the organization, as well as performance management, often developing the systems that you use, the forms, the tools that you use for performance management. Generally, employee wellness, if you have an HR department, comes under this category. Organizational design, so they have skills in how to design organizations for most best efficiency, effectiveness, and support of staff. Payroll, I think, is kind of an obvious one that people know. Many do training and development. They support recruitment and selection, and most of the time health and safety falls under the HR department. So you can see where an organization has a large HR department. They probably have the capacity to focus on all of these areas. Smaller organizations that may only have one or even a part-time HR staff, there's going to be some need to focus on, what pieces can that individual actually accomplish in their time. And on the right-hand side, you see that they do all of these things, or can or should do all of these things at all of these different levels. So when you're looking at strategic thinking, they can support all of these areas in strategic thinking. From an operational day-to-day perspective, looking at future planning, and particularly when you're looking at talent management, recruitment, and selection, that's a large piece that HR often does. They can help you deal with current issues. So again, the pandemic is the example. Lots of things that needed to be navigated and still need to be navigated as we think about how that impacts our human resources, our policies and procedures, and how we manage things, and the legalities that go with that. They can support it at an organizational level, and they can also support you and the staff at an individual level. So we wanted to just take a moment here and see what you think about where the overlap is between what HR could be doing, and in many cases are doing, and what you do in your function as a leader. So Maria's just copying the polls over to the chat box there so that you can go in, click on the poll link in the chat box, and answer the questions to our poll. So there it is right there in the chat box. Please head over there, click, and put your thoughts by way of dots or check marks, whatever the case may be. I think it's maybe just dots with this software that you can use as to where do you see overlap in the work that you do and the work that human resources does. If you're having trouble finding the poll, again, across the bottom of your screen, usually depending on how you have Zoom formatted on your screen, there's a chat box. It says chat, has a little speech bubble above it. And again, we have the link right there. And once you put your thoughts in, your little buttons in, if you could come back to Zoom, so look for that little blue and white camera again, and you can see where everybody else has indicated overlap. And we have a number of dots sort of right in the middle on HR, which I'm going to assume suggests that there's overlap everywhere. We've got a large number on recruitment and selection, training and development, health and safety, labor and employee relations is well represented, as well as is payroll, employee wellness. Yeah, so depending on, again, the size of your HR department, sort of how much staff they have to work with you, depending on your exact management and leadership role, there should at different points in time be overlap in all of these areas as a number of people. Oh, and we have someone, thanks Colette, that manages health and safety with us here today. And that's very often part of the frontline supervisor's role. So health and safety may be developed by somebody in HR, or maybe a specific HR component of someone's role, but also as you're a supervisor, you also have responsibilities related to health and safety. So we'll go back to our slides and keep moving through. Thanks for participating in that exercise. What we want to take a look at next is some of the sources of authority related to HR, because HR, of course, really, and particularly again, from that risk management perspective, there are a number of pieces of legislation that will drive the work that you do in HR. And I think it can be valuable to have that big picture of how that all fits together. So you'll see on this slide, the number one source of authority is legislation. And there are many examples there of legislation that would engage in your HR work. There are more than that. There is also a hierarchy in legislation. You don't necessarily need to remember that, but just so that you're aware that, it's very structured. Charter of Rights and Freedoms is sort of top of the list. Provincial legislation comes next, but it can't contradict the Charter of Rights. And as we actually move down the list, that is one of the rules. The lower sources of authority cannot contradict the higher sources of authority. And if they do, then they're essentially rendered moot. You have to follow the higher source of authority if there's a conflict. And I'll give you a really good example of where that occurs as we work our way down. Quite often there's case law that has interpreted or clarified legislation or provided us with additional considerations. Again, reading legislation isn't always the easiest thing to do. And sometimes, frankly, legislation is written to be a little bit vague. So we need to see where people have challenged it and see what the results have been so that we understand how it really works. You will also have your professional college standards. And most professional colleges, their standards come directly from legislation. And if they do, it falls under item number 1. But if they've developed additional standards as part of their expectation as a college, this is where it comes in. And then organizational policy. And while your organization writes your policy, your organization decides on your policy, it can be a legislative authority, or a legal, I guess is a better way to put it. I apologize, a legal authority. And the example of that is if an employee decides to take you to court or sue you, take some sort of legal action against you, your organizational policy can be used as evidence. And if you have organizational policy that you didn't follow, then you're held responsible for that. So it can be used legally against you. It can also be used legally as on your own side to say, no, here, listen, here's the policy we have. And as long as you're holding people accountable to that policy, then that can be used in your favor legally. But again, recognize that you cannot write organizational policy that is in contravention of any of the authorities that I listed above. So an example that we'll use and we'll have a bit more discussion about later is the Employment Standards Act does not talk about probationary periods at all. So many people think the idea of a probationary period comes from the Employment Standards Act. But it's actually an organizational policy. And where the Employment Standards Act comes in is how long somebody can work for you and you can still dismiss them without having either cause or having to pay them out. And that length of time is 3 months. So if your organization has a different probationary period, that's fine. And that's a decision that an organization makes. And there's lots of good reasons, frankly, to make that decision. But it has nothing to do with the Employment Standards Act. The Employment Standards Act only talks about how much you have to pay people notice if you're going to terminate them. And if it's less than 3 months, then the amount is 0. Organizational practice is the last piece I'll talk to you about related to a source of authority. And in the absence of policy, it is evidence. So again, if you ever end up in sort of a legal situation with an employee and you don't have a policy on something, but you're able to say, listen, everybody knows that it's our practice. Here's evidence that it's our practice. We talk about it in team meetings all the time. We regularly send out communications about it. It may not be a policy, but it's clearly part of our practice. That can be used in your favor. And again, on the flip side, if an employee is able to say, well, they don't have policy and they let these kinds of things happen, and the fact that you don't have a policy can also be used as evidence. And what's really critical, therefore, with policy is that implementation piece. So if you've got a policy, but nobody follows it, nobody understands it, you might as well not have a policy because it in fact could be used against you. So making sure that employees understand policy, understand why it's important, and that managers and supervisors are enforcing policy is quite critical from a risk perspective. So yes, let's move on and look at our next slide. So we are going to do a few scenarios now, and I'm not sure that you've had the opportunity to see Kathleen live on screen yet during our sessions, but you're about to, although she might look a little bit different than what even we are used to seeing her as. Maria and Kathleen are going to present a bit of a scenario for you. So while they're doing that, if you could look for the red flags, and if you could think about where the organization has been exposed to risk in this scenario. Thanks, and I'll come.
Good afternoon, Susie. I've scheduled this meeting to inform you that you didn't pass your probation. It's unfortunate that this has not worked out, and I will be asking you to gather up your things. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. As you are still on probation, you are not eligible for any termination pay or severance.
But I thought the ESA says you have to provide at least 1 week's notice or pay in lieu of notice if I worked for you for more than 3 months, and I've been here for 5 months.
You started 4 months ago, and on your first day of work, I gave you your employment agreement and you signed it. It states that your first 6 months were probation and we could let you go without notice. Further, you have not been performing all of the tasks in your job description, and the ones you are performing, the quality is not really at the expected level.
You never gave me a job description or told me that my quality wasn't good. You kept saying it was fine. I'll be talking to my lawyer about whether you owe me some kind of severance for this.
Thanks very much, manager and employee. So let's do a little bit of a debrief. Think about the red flags that you saw, and Maria's going to, I believe, put the poll back up for us. There you go. If you can go back into the chat, click on the poll and share with us areas of risk that you saw in the actions and the discussion that you witnessed. Yeah, we've got quite a few here. So remember too, you can always, if you don't want to type your own and you've already seen somebody say, just click on it and it'll get, you can vote for it. Yeah, I'll actually go, the signed contract first day should be done before starting work. That's absolutely an important piece. And that can be challenging sometimes if you're trying to get somebody into a role very quickly. But an employment contract won't hold up in court if they signed it after they already started work, so on the first day, because it seemed that they would have signed it under duress. They were already standing there, you know, they would have resigned from another job already, they got themselves ready, they drove in for the day and they expect to be employed. And now you're asking them to agree to something in order to be employed. So it's very important to sign it before starting work. Yes, absolutely. Refer to a job description and the employee never received it. That's again, a huge risk area. How can you ask people to conform to expectations if you don't share with them what they are? Policy doesn't align with laws, perhaps. Absolutely. And it's, again, it doesn't have to align with laws from the perspective of if you want to do a longer probation period, you can. It's the fact that they're saying we're not going to pay severance because it was within probation. And again, those two things are completely unrelated. Whether or not you have to pay severance is strictly a time-bound issue. Let's see, there no formal performance review. I think that's really important as well. Or even if it's not formal, where's the feedback? And I see that further down as well. You know, in that probation period, if you want somebody to be successful, it's critical to give that feedback and give people the opportunity to do their job well. Oh, and there's one that just sort of disappeared off the screen, but I think we've covered a lot of the items there. So yeah, evaluation was an honest reflection of the quality of work, just kind of saying fine. isn't helpful. And yeah, documentation not provided on inadequate behavior. Thank you. So that's, you've done a fantastic job of picking up those red flags. And if you can click on your Zoom and go back to Zoom, we'll just move on to the next slide here. And there's a debrief, but of course, you've touched on everything as you provided your analysis of the scenario. So I won't go over these items. Obviously, they're in your slide deck, and you've seen them, or you came up with them and was able to identify them. So we're going to move now to the idea of progressive discipline. And again, this is a place where I want to be very clear that your organization's progressive discipline process may be different than what I have on the screen here. There are different ways of doing progressive discipline. This is a fairly common one, but you may find that, you know, some items are in a different order or have different details related to them. But often, always should be the case, if progressive discipline is being implemented, it's the supervisor or manager that implements it. And again, hopefully with the support of HR, but really important for you to understand how it works. And I'm going to start on the left-hand side of the screen. It's really important for you to understand which of these steps are within your span of authority. So organizations may say, supervisors can do verbal warnings, but a manager must be involved in a written warning. Or they could say supervisors can do verbal and written, but they must involve a director in suspension. There may be another level of authority that needs to be involved for termination. So it's really important to know how far you go in the role, whatever role that it is you're in, and when you need to sort of seek a higher authority in order to implement a particular step of progressive discipline. And of course, quite often, if you are in many organizations, if you are starting on a progressive discipline scale, your direct supervisor manager would want to have an opportunity to understand that as well. So your verbal warning is sometimes in an informal conversation, can have happened prior to this step. So you don't necessarily, again, your progressive discipline may say, start informal, and then you actually start on the verbal warning scale once you've tried to address something informally. It's really important that even if you do have that informal conversation, you document it. Particularly if you think about if another manager comes in after you, another supervisor, and they don't know that you've already given an informal warning, then they might start there when really it's time to go to the verbal step. It also gives you the opportunity when you're following up from your verbal warning, and you should always follow up from verbal warnings with an email, confirming that they have already received a verbal warning or have already received an informal warning, and that this is a follow-up to the verbal warning that they received. You should tell them that in advance, because sometimes people think, oh, if I'm getting an email, that means I'm getting a written warning as well. And no, this is just confirmation that you've done the verbal warning. Quite often the next step is a written warning, so you want to hand it to them in person and ideally discuss it with them. It's, you know, you don't necessarily want the written warning to just show up in their mailbox or their email without having had a conversation. Sometimes you talk to them and say they're getting a written warning, and then you write it up afterwards. And in that case, it can come to them some other way but being handed to them. But again, you need to have discussions every step of the way, make sure they understand why they're receiving these warnings. When you move to the suspension step, again, really important place to make sure your HR folks are sort of walking lockstep with you on this. There's questions about how long should it be, which may be documented in policy or may not be documented in policy. Sometimes the suspension is sort of two steps. A first suspension might be a day, and then the next suspension might be 3 days. So again, this is where you really want to understand how it works in your organization. And there's other things. Sometimes you tell them what the date is, and sometimes you negotiate with them. That depends again on how your organization approaches it. And you may, unfortunately, have to move to a step of termination once you've worked through this process. Recognizing, and this can be hard sometimes to sort of get your head around. Even if you've gone through this whole process, you may not have an ironclad with cause termination. So if the organization decides they're going to provide severance, don't take that as you not having followed the process properly, and don't take that as the organization undermining you. That, again, is a risk management piece that takes lots of things into consideration, whether or not the person might come back and say, you know, well, sure, they went through progressive discipline, but I think the only reason that they let me go was because I'm older, and that's a protected category, and I'm going to try and sue you for that. So there's really a place where HR and legal need to support you in doing that termination away. Again, that's going to minimize risk to the organization, or if not minimize, sort of make sure the organization's risk tolerance level has been met. So again, it's important to clarify who in your organization needs to be part of this process, who's leading each step. You know, does your manager expect to know every time you do an informal warning, or do they want to know every time you do a verbal, or maybe they only want to know when you get to written? Make sure you understand if there's anything that you should be aware of. So if a staff member during a discipline discussion says, oh, well, you guys have never supported me with my, you know, sort of name, whatever the issue could be, then that's that moment to pause to say, and okay, are we aware this employee needs an accommodation? If we're not, we need to address that, because if you don't, again, that could take you down human rights issues. And document anything you may want to refer to later. Document it for yourself, and ideally share it with a staff member. And you can say in the email, you know, this summarizes our conversation. If you disagree that it summarizes our conversation, if you think it mis-summarizes, please tell me, so that they don't potentially have a place to fight about it later, that you didn't actually, you know, that you've said it wrong. Give them the chance to say that up front. I have a comment here, still learning director role versus manager to know who does what in the steps, and also when in direct partnership with HR staff. Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be organization specific. So that's a great place to say, okay, I need to either sit down with my, if you're a director reporting to a VP or executive director, whatever it is, if you're a manager, to sit down and say, okay, I'd like to go through the progressive discipline process and make sure I understand what my role is, when you need to be involved, or talk to HR and get that from them. So thank you for that point. We're going to move into performance. And you know, there's definitions here around performance, and there's a few different ways to think about performance. So performance management, the definition that we use is that it's ongoing feedback and guidance direction to support staff members. So you are always doing performance management, hopefully, with staff in your teams, making sure people have growth opportunities, get the chance to ask questions, that you're directing them when they need direction, that you're giving them the opportunity to correct concerns. A performance review, and there's a number of different names for performance reviews, and many organizations do them, but not all do. But if your organization has a performance review, it is a point in time opportunity to reflect over a past time period, to sit down and really have a conversation about goals and objectives and strategies. However, ideally, it's not just that point in time. Ideally, a performance review isn't done, put away, and only pulled back out when it's time to do the next one. If you're, you know, if you're talking about goals and objectives and strategies, then you should be, you know, having conversations and checking in and, you know, tell me how you're doing at meeting this objective, without waiting for that performance review specific time period. And again, nothing should be a surprise. If you're doing performance management, if you're having ongoing discussions, providing ongoing feedback, really there's nothing in that document that should be surprising for either individual. If you've got a good relationship with the staff member, they should be sharing things with you as well. So it really is just a documentation of a summary of things that you already know. And again, that idea that your ongoing discussion should happen by reviewing goals, objectives, and strategies and how you're supporting these staff. A performance management plan, and again, sometimes it comes by different names, but this is really where you're developing a plan for an individual staff member related to issues that they're underperforming in. They need targeted development, targeted strategies. It's generally quite formal and it's generally documented. So somebody who, you've been doing performance management, there's sort of an ongoing struggle with particular things, even though you're trying to do that informally, it really turns performance management into a formal process and steps that you take together. So you document, here's what the issues are, here's the things that we're going to do to work on those issues. Here's what you as a staff member need from me as your supervisor to help you, and I'm committed to doing those things. And then you formally check in on that written document, and it just brings a lot more structure to the process when somebody needs that structure, when they're really, when their review has been not satisfactory and they need additional support. Or maybe it's not related to a performance review, but you've just seen behaviors, actions occurred repeatedly, you've had conversations, and you want to take this step to support them. And again, generally, once you put a performance management plan into place, it means that if they're not successful in meeting it, the consequences are quite significant. It can be used in concert with progressive discipline as well. So we're going to pause here, and our employee and manager is going to give us another scenario so that we can learn a little bit more about this topic. Thank you.
Well, as you can see from the discussions that we've just had about your review, there are many areas where you excel and are accomplishing expectations at a very high level. The data that you pull for grant writing is spot on as far as what is needed. You are an excellent writer, and the people that you work with report that you are collaborative and ensure that you have had input in the development of the grants that you're writing. The challenge that continues to crop up is meeting timelines. As you will recall, we had a few informal discussions about this, and then in August, I provided an official verbal warning. Other people have noted in providing feedback for your performance review that while they very much appreciate your approach to collaboration and skill in writing, they too have been impacted by times when deadlines have crept up and your approach to them results in them scrambling to get what you need. If you recall, just last week, you sent me a grant for review at 9 p.m. and it was due at 8 a.m. the next day, leaving us no time for course correction if necessary. Are these comments fair? Do you agree that this is a challenge?
Well, yes, I know I've been getting a little late getting things to people as I prepare grants, but I'm so busy and so is everyone else. Sometimes they just don't have time to meet with me when I need them to, or a grant comes in at the last minute and throws off all my plans.
Okay, so you have concerns that it is sometimes factors that you don't feel you can control that cause missing of deadlines. Being able to prioritize, work under pressure, and meet tight deadlines is part of your job description. We need to find a way for you to successfully navigate these things. You have currently not successfully passed your performance review as a result of this issue. I also have here for you written warning for the incident last week. You and I will also be developing a performance management plan to assist you in successfully overcoming this challenge.
Going to fire me?
My goal is to help you succeed. This is very serious in that the organization can't continue meeting our mission without grant funding, and the work that you do is essential for that. I do need to be clear that resolving this issue is critical to your continued employment with us. Again, my intention is to work with you to avoid needing to move to that step. I am going to give you a list of things that need to be in the goals of the plan. Things like having a final draft of a grant application ready for review 24 hours before it is due. I'd like you to think about tools and resources you need and steps you need to take to ensure that happens every time. We'll get back together on Thursday and work out the details of the plan and then meet bi-weekly for the next 3 months to ensure that the plan is being met and troubleshoot any challenges you are having and what I can do to support you. Do you have any questions about that right now?
No, I guess I just need some time to really think about this, and I'll be prepared to discuss it further and how to avoid it in the future when we get together again on Thursday.
And maybe next time, take your glasses off, just saying.
All right, thanks very much, manager and another employee. And I think before we end the session, Maria will give you a chance to see what Kathleen looks like actually when she's not doing our scenarios for us. But hopefully you really had a chance to sort of listen to what was happening there, thinking about these performance tools and how to navigate performance a bit that we've been talking about. And we'll move into another poll. I recognize that a couple of you are having some challenges. Hopefully you've been able to find your way into the polls now, and Maria will put it in the chat again. And we're really just asking you to sort of say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well did the manager do in using the performance plan as a supportive tool? And we've got quite a few answers coming in, and thank you for doing the poll. Again, if you close the poll and go back to Zoom, you can see the answers coming in real time. And it looks like the majority of folks who've been able to answer so far really think that it was a very supportive approach. We've got a few people, well, maybe a third to a half of folks that think it was a bit on the less supportive side. You know, part of it that's really challenging is when you're an employee and having this conversation, quite often, even when the employer, the manager, is using supportive language as best they can, and sort of going to where Kathleen said, like, are you going to fire me? You know, you sort of get that tunnel vision and you may not hear everything that's being said. You may sort of get focused on that. What does this mean? Am I going to get fired? And one of the things that manager did that was very supportive was they're going to get back together very quickly. So they're going to get back together on Thursday. The employee will have an opportunity again to do some reflection, think about it a little bit more. They'll get their written warning, and in that written warning, and when they get an email that will sort of summarize this, hopefully that email will sort of reiterate, you know, we want to do what we can do to support you. Maria or the manager used, you know, we language, sort of that we are going to support you, that you're not in this on your own, but also was clear this is serious. And that can be a really hard balance to strike, because you don't want somebody to walk away thinking it's not serious when you've moved into a performance plan, because it is. But you also want to say, you know, I'm going to support you in the success of this. I think we can develop a plan that will move you to a successful place. So everybody is going to hear things a little bit differently. It's a really good idea to check in with the employee afterwards. Just say, you know, how are you feeling? Is there anything else sort of that came up from our discussion earlier today? And then again, set that next meeting very quickly, so that you have another opportunity to clarify. And that also can support the person with feeling like, okay, we are going to deal with this quickly. I'm not going to be just sort of sitting around wondering what it is that I'm supposed to do. We can take some action and sort of motivate that way to say, let's move forward together. So we're going to do a second poll. So if you want to, again, pop back into polls and ask how you feel the manager did from the perspective of the risk management side. So there is risk management, again, that's really part of every HR interaction while you're also trying to support people. And our early answers are that was done very well. Yeah. So the majority say very well. There's a few wells and a couple of extremely wells. And Yeah, I think Maria, the manager, did that quite well. Again, being very clear, setting, again, that Thursday meeting, that's a timeline that, again, it's not just going to drag on. We're going to do this on a particular date. Gave very specific examples, which is a good risk management issue, and also supportive. Here's an example. Do you agree that that example happened? Talked about, we've already had informal discussions. It's time to move to the next step of this so that we can support you. And again, the documentation is going to be a really important risk management issue. And when Kathleen, the employee, said, again, are you going to fire me? Very quickly, my goal is to help you succeed. However, this is a very serious issue. So I think, again, that's a good balance there and really supports risk management. So for our last few minutes together today, we're going to move into a completely different direction and move out of performance and move ourselves into accommodations. And we've heard from many leaders, open managers over the years, that this can be a really difficult thing to deal with, difficult thing to get your head around. Again, ideally, human resources is working side by side with you when you're dealing with an accommodation. But again, you may not have the kind of human resources that will allow them to do that in a really specific way. Again, hopefully you have policies and forms in your organization that will help you. So really here we're taking a bit of a step back to help you understand the duty to accommodate and sort of why you need to do this piece of work. And there is a very good link at the bottom, a resource that you can take a look at to learn a little bit more yourself. So the duty to accommodate, again, is a legislative requirement. It's a legal requirement. It's right up at the top of that hierarchy. And the way that it's described in the legislation is first, the goal is to ensure that someone that can work is able to do so. And how it's described in the legislation is that an employer, you must accommodate to the point of undue hardship. And this is where, as I mentioned before, sometimes legislation can be vague. This is about the vaguest thing that legislation could ever say to you. Well, what is undue hardship? What's the definition of undue hardship? And the answer to that is it depends. And really it depends on your organization. If you have a quite small organization, undue hardship is going to happen much faster than if you're in a really large organization. If you have access to funding, so for example, if somebody requires some sort of physical accommodation, and you can get funding to purchase items in order to support that physical accommodation, then you need to do that. If you are in a situation where somebody is no longer able to do home visits and that's part of their role, are there other similar jobs where they don't have to do home visits? There's so many things that you have to look at. And again, it's very unique to the organization, what is considered undue. So it's a dollar value piece. It's a piece about how you can continue your operations and do what you need to do to support your clients. And really that you've looked at all of the possibilities and determined if it's something that you can do. The second piece that's really important about it, and I know even that is quite a vague answer, and unfortunately, that is the reality of the term undue hardship, is it's very, very specific to the situation and the organization. The other thing that it describes is bona fide work requirements. And what that means is for example, if your job description for an administrative assistant position says they must have a driver's license and be able to drive, and then your administrative assistant has been with you for 2 years in that particular role, and they've had to go to offsite meetings 4 times, and they've had to do deliveries twice in that 2 years. You would look at that and you would say, like, that really isn't a bona fide work requirement. For the amount of times that that person has to travel for the organization, there are other ways it could be done. Deliveries could be sent by a courier. Apologies. There's other ways. They could use public transit. They could go with someone else to a meeting, all of that kind of thing. So just because you put something in a job description doesn't mean it will hold up when you're looking at the accommodation. It has to actually be something that the individual needs to be able to do in order to do the job that they're being asked to do. The other thing that people are sometimes confused about is you must accommodate employees with disabilities, and that includes injuries, and that is even if their injury is not work-related. So that is one of the things, again, that has sort of been clarified through case law as people have looked at this issue. An employee has a right to privacy related to accommodations. This can be really challenging for managers and supervisors, particularly because, and we've talked so much over the past few sessions about how important as a leader and a manager it is to be transparent. But we also mentioned the caveat with that is sometimes you can't. And accommodations is a place where you can't be transparent unless the employee allows you to be. So absolutely have that conversation with the employee. What are you comfortable with me sharing about why you have, this accommodation? If they say nothing at all, then that's what you're bound by. And then, it can be challenging if a particular team has to do a particular task, but one member, and it's a task nobody likes to do, but one member of the team doesn't have to do it. That can cause some anxiety. It can cause, we talked about the SCARF model previously, people talking about it's not fair and all of that kind of thing. So that's, again, where human resources can help you navigate that a little bit. And again, hopefully you're able to have a conversation with the employee to see if there's a level of sharing that they are comfortable with the team so that people have a better understanding of what's happening. Finally, before we wrap up for the day, just want to include a few practical tips to help you decide when to consult with HR. So again, a little bit of it depends on the size of your organization and how much HR resource there is to go around. But your office files, a practical tip, you should have office files. You should document any conversation or issue with a staff member with a date. And that's something for you personally to refer back to. So again, that idea of, I know I did a verbal warning, or I know I did an informal warning already. When did I do that? Yes, I need to sort of escalate, or geez, this was an informal warning a year ago and things got better, but maybe I should do informal again. That sort of evidence for yourself to fall back on, but it also can be used as evidence if the issue becomes a legal issue. So be aware that your office files can be subpoenaed. If a staff member, again, decides to take your organization to court, you're a manager or a leader, anything you have in your office files can be brought forward as evidence. So just like any of you who sort of write clinical notes, write your office files as if somebody might read them someday. Be very fact-based, describe what happened, don't put your judgment in there. There may be occasions where it's appropriate when you see an issue with a staff member that you decide not to address it. So we did talk a little bit when we talked about conflict with the idea of avoidance. The vast majority of the time, you can't avoid issues with staff, but there may be a particular case, an employee who's never had an issue with a particular thing, 20-year employee, never had an issue with something. You saw a little something happen in a meeting and you thought, you know what, if it happens again, I'll address it. But let's say it's one bad day out of 20 years. Still document it and document why you didn't talk to them about it. So that if it does happen again, you can remind yourself, you can share that information with others if it's necessary, and you can use it as an example if you do end up talking to the staff member about it later. This is the second time I've seen this happen. The first time I didn't address it because I gave you the benefit of the doubt, et cetera, et cetera. As I spoke to with accommodations, ask the employee before you share anything personal. And that even goes to, many organizations, they might send out a message about a bereavement, for example. And I've personally been in the situation where a bereavement has happened and the staff member has said, I don't want you to tell people about this bereavement because it's a family member that a lot of my colleagues know the challenges that I've had with them. And I just, I need not to be sort of people to talk to me about this right now. So as it may feel like the right thing to do to because everybody's going to want to support somebody in a bereavement, or even if somebody's sick, to say that they're sick. The best thing to do when somebody's away, if you don't know for sure that they're okay, if you haven't asked them if they're okay, is just to say so-and-so is away today. Don't give a reason, let them tell the reason if they want, or have them give you permission. Again, don't promise or threaten something and not follow through on it. I have an example of an organization that I worked with that thought they'd gone very well through the progressive discipline process and that they had a termination with cause. The employee came back to them and ended up winning because they sent them about 4 letters, and each letter said, the next time this happens, you will be terminated. And the next time it happened, they didn't get terminated. They got another letter that says, the next time this happened, you will be terminated. The courts are very much lean towards the employee because there's a real power imbalance between an employer and an employee. And they said, you know what? You kept threatening to terminate her and you never did. So why would she think that this time she'd get terminated? So again, once you say you're going to do something, follow through on it. Consistency, of course, with the individual, across individuals. The only valid reason to be inconsistent with people is that there are different circumstances. And don't be afraid to make sure they are validly different circumstances. You don't want to have perception of favored relationships. And again, that can be a challenge sometimes with accommodations. So really, when to consult with HR, anytime you are uncertain, anytime you want to clarify, anytime you're doing something new for the first time. Every HR person that I've ever experienced is really glad to be brought in early rather than come in later when you've been uncertain and maybe not picked the correct way forward. So again, my last message before I hand it over to Maria for a quick wrap up is your HR practices, your policies, what you do as a manager and leader, and what the HR department does should both always be balancing being supportive of the individual and managing risk for the organization. So I will give you back to Maria for your last minute.
And thank you, Carrie, for your expert advice. This assignment this week is to describe and analyze a performance scenario from your real life experience where you were either the supervisor providing the information or the staff member receiving it. What things happened in that interaction that you feel were supportive practices for the staff member, supportive practices for risk management, and not supportive for the staff and not supportive with respect to risk management? What could have been done differently for those items that were not supportive? And question 2, provide your top 10 list of tips for leaders to remember related to HR that you have either learned from this webinar or in your work experience to date. If you have any questions, please reach out to Carrie or I. Thanks so much.